4. Pre-payment practice and disclosures. Which of the following could cancel a sale? What is the buyer of an older house pre-1978 does not get a lead paint hazard disclosure? If the buyer of an older house, pre-1978, does not get a lead paint hazard disclosure, he can cancel the sale. Transfer disclosure statements are required for residential sellers, not foreclosure sales, and the buyer finding a better deal elsewhere after signing a purchase agreement is not an acceptable reason to cancel a sale. A broker is listing her neighbor's home. The commission should be determined by which of the following? What is rates negotiated with her neighbor? The commission should be determined by which of the rates negotiated with her neighbor. Which of the following activities is a violation of the Federal Fair Housing Act? What is a nonprofit church that denies access to its retirement home to any person because of race? A nonprofit church that provides access to a retirement home is governed by fair housing laws. If they deny access based on race, it would be considered a violation of Federal Fair Housing Act. The wrong answers are not violations. The private club is exempt because its preferential treatment is based on its membership. The homeowner is exempt, so long as he is selling his home without a broker, and the warehouse is exempt because it's not a housing unit. A lease for an apartment in a residential apartment project is usually which type of lease? What is a gross lease? A gross lease is a type of lease where the tenant pays a flat rental amount, and the landlord pays for all property charges regularly incurred by ownership of the property, including taxes, utilities and water. Most residential leases are gross leases, although some commercial leases are gross leases as well. Under California law, the real estate commissioner has authority to do which of the following? What is impose fines, revoke licenses and promulgate rules and regulations? As head of the California Department of Real Estate, the commissioner promulgates rules and regulations in the California Code of Regulations that essentially have the effect of law. The commissioner also has the sole authority to grant, limit, suspend, or revoke a real estate license in the state of California. Not even the courts have this power. When may a finder's fee be paid to a non-licensee? What is if it is for making an introduction only? A finder's fee may be paid to a non-licensee, provided it is for making an introduction only. Which of these governmental bodies regulate and control the Subdivision Map Act? What is local agencies? The point of the Map Act is to allow local government agencies in California to control the physical aspects of a subdivision and how they may affect adjoining or nearby properties and the community as a whole. Discrimination in the sale or rental of residential housing accommodations based on sex, marital status, color, religion, race or national origin of the prospective tenant or buyer, is illegal, contrary to public policy, unenforceable. All of the other options are correct. What is all of the other options are correct? Fair housing laws are based on the principle that discrimination is illegal, unenforceable, and contrary to public policy. Placing extra requirements on single buyers is discriminatory and is a violation of the fair housing laws. For example, requiring a co-senior only for unmarried tenants. Note, this question says that discrimination and discriminatory acts are unenforceable, not that discrimination laws are unenforceable. A real estate licensee submits a license renewal application, but his name is on a list of obligors who have not complied with the court-ordered payment of child support. Which of the following is most nearly correct? What is a temporary renewal will be issued, but the licensee must pay the delinquent amount within 150 days. A temporary renewal will be issued, but the licensee must pay the delinquent amount within 150 days. Real estate licenses are issued for. What is 4 years? Real estate licenses are issued for a 4-year term. When selling a house, certain charges are prohibited by the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, RESPA. As appropriate, a buyer or seller may legally be charged for all of the following except, disclosure settlement statements, preparation of loan documents, credit reports, appraisals necessary to make the loan. What is the disclosure settlement statements? A closing disclosure must be given to the borrower by the lender at no charge. If a business is sold without complying with the Bulk Sales Act, what is the assets still belong to the vendor as far as creditors are concerned? If the bulk sales law is not complied with, creditors still have a claim on the assets of the vendor, seller, purchased by the vendee, buyer. This is why it is very important for the vendee, buyer, to see that the bulk sales law is complied with. You are a California real estate broker. A prospect is referred to you by an out-of-state broker and a sale is consummated by you. You want to split your commission with the cooperating broker. Under the California real estate law, what is you may pay a commission to a broker of another state. A California licensed real estate broker may pay a commission to a broker of another state. Interest accrued on an interest-bearing client's trust account may not be directly paid to the associated broker, seller, purchaser, principal real estate broker. What is associated broker? Interest accrued on an interest-bearing client's trust account may not be directly paid to the associated broker, as all payments for real estate services must come from the broker. Note, this is an example of a question that asks you complete a true statement. which is a common question format on many re-exams. The only answer that completes a true statement is associated broker, as any licensees other than a principal broker must be paid by through the principal broker's account and cannot be paid directly from a client's trust account. Discrimination is prohibited in lending practices under what is Equal Credit Opportunity Act, passed in 1992. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act prohibits a broad spectrum of discriminatory lending practices, including the granting or denial of credit or the costs associated with borrowing based on race, gender, marital status, source of income, for example, public assistance, and other factors. Which of the following best describes an earnest money agreement? What is a legally enforceable contract requiring the signatures of all parties to be valid? Earnest money is a deposit, partial payment, or down payment made by a purchaser of real estate as evidence of good faith. An earnest money agreement is a legally enforceable contract which requires the signatures of all parties to be valid, which act allows the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing to take action against public or private housing entities that discriminate. The Unruh Act, or the Rumford Act. What is the Rumford Act? While the Unruh Act provides protection against discrimination by businesses, the Rumford Act provides protection against discrimination in housing by landlords, apartment owners, housing developers, mortgage companies and real estate firms. When an escrow officer receives two pest control reports, the escrow officer should, what is get the buyer's and the seller's written approval on which one to use. If there are two or more termite reports, the escrow company should make the broker aware of this fact and then wait to hear from the buyer and seller for their instructions. If a deed has a restrictive covenant which prohibits the sale of the property to persons of a particular race, that covenant will, what is have no effect on the conveyance, but the covenant will be unenforceable. Racial deed restrictions are unenforceable because they violate the U.S. Constitution. They have no effect on the conveyance. Of the 45 hours of continuing education the licensee must complete, what is 18 hours of consumer protection? When a licensee needs 45 hours of continuing education to renew his, her licensees, at least 18 hours must be consumer protection. The Commissioner's final public report on a residential development would include all of the following except, what is assurance that the developer is not charging an excessive price for the properties? The public report does not guarantee that the property has not been overpriced. Note, this question asks would include all of the following except, which means it's looking for a false answer, and it's false that the final public report includes an assurance that the developer is not charging an excessive price for the properties. What options are open to the real estate commissioner if he or she believes a subdivision developer is making fraudulent statements? What is the commissioning may issue a desist and refrain order? A desist and refrain order is similar to a restraining order in that it immediately halts the action or actions in question. However, the desist order may be issued directly by the commissioner, whereas a restraining order typically goes through the courts. Which of the following is a duty of the real estate commissioner? Qualifying applicants for real estate licenses, investigating complaints filed by the public against a licensee. All of the other options represent duties of the real estate commissioner, approving or disapproving public reports for subdivisions. What is all of the other options represents duties of the real estate commissioner. The Department of Real Estate exists to ensure the public is protected and well served by all segments of the real estate industry. Accordingly, assuring professionalism among licensees through screening and testing, providing an open channel for filing complaints, and making sure builders and developers offer products that meet code and live up to representations form the department's and commissioner's essential mission. The commissioner is ultimately responsible for the DRE. So the duties performed by the department are also the commissioner's duties. The landlord of an apartment building neglected to repair the building's plumbing system. As a result, the apartments did not receive water, as provided by the leases. If a tenant's unit becomes uninhabitable, which of the following would most likely result? What is claim of constructive eviction? Constructive eviction is a term used in the law of real property to describe a circumstance in which a landlord either does something or fails to do something that he or she has a legal duty to provide. For example, the landlord refuses to provide heat or water to the apartment, rendering the property uninhabitable. A seller engages a broker to find a buyer ready, willing and able to purchase a seller's parcel of real property. The seller executes and delivers to the broker an exclusive right to sell employment contract. A few weeks prior to the expiration date of the employment contract, the seller decides to revoke the contract before any sale occurred. What is the owner can revoke his contract but could be liable for damages? Exclusive right to sell listings can be revoked, but there are many conditions which could cause the owner to still be liable for a commission or damages. For example, if the broker brought in a willing, ready and able buyer who was ready to execute but was prevented from doing so by the seller could be liable even if this happened after the contract was revoked. The exclusive right to sell contract will generally list all of the applicable conditions, including how a contract can be revoked and when a broker will be due their commission. Kelly was the listing agent for a property that Andrew, a salesperson from another brokerage, found a buyer for. At closing, his commission is for less than what he believes was agreed to and the dispute arises. According to the Code of Ethics of the National Association of Realtors, how will they settle this matter? What is arbitration? The purpose of arbitration is to settle disputes as quickly, as simply and as cost-effectively as possible. In a sense, it is the opposite of litigation, which involves attorneys, courts, high cost and drawn-out procedures. However, while the Code of Ethics mandates arbitration as the first step, it does not deny a plaintiff the right to sue later if agreement cannot be reached or one party fails to live up to the agreement. When a lender makes a loan regulated by the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, the loan applicant must be provided with which of the following? What is a loan estimate? When a home buyer applies for a home loan, the TILA/RESPA integrated disclosure rule requires the lender to provide a loan estimate to the buyer within 3 days of receipt of the loan application, and all revisions have to be delivered at least 7 days before closing. The loan estimate details the loan terms, mortgage payments, costs at closing and other costs and fees related to the loan, many of which cannot change. When selling a house, certain charges are prohibited by the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, RESPA. As appropriate, a buyer or seller may legally be charged for all of the following except: what is disclosure? Settlement statements. A closing disclosure must be given to the borrower by the lender at no charge. When a buyer in a residential property transaction receives an amended transfer disclosure statement from the seller's agent, he is legally entitled to: what is rescind? The purchase contract. A transfer disclosure statement is required of the seller in most residential transactions, even for properties sold as is. If a TDS is amended, the buyer has 3 days to rescind the contract and back out of the agreement. If a TDS is defective, incorrect or false, then the buyer has 2 years to pursue action against the seller. When a real estate licensee fails to renew a license before it expires, the licensee, has 2 years from the expiration to renew by paying a late fee, but will not be required to take the state exam again. An expired real estate license can still be renewed late, up to 2 years after its expiration. A licensee needs 45 hours of continuing education to renew her licensees. At least 18 hours of the 45 hours must be consumer protection. Joe is a listing agent. Joe cannot legally answer a seller's question about the buyer's race, due to the What is the Rumford Act? The Rumford Fair Housing Act was passed in 1963 by the California legislature to help end racial discrimination by property owners and landlords who refuse to rent or sell their property to people based on race. Which of the following persons is authorized to manage property for the general public? What is a licensed real estate broker? You'll need a real estate broker's license, or you must work for an individual who has one to operate as a California property manager. You must demonstrate specific training in the field and pass a written examination administered by the state's Department of Real Estate to get a broker's license. Being a realtor is not sufficient unless you are working under a licensed broker. When a real estate licensee fails to renew a license before it expires, the licensee, has 2 years from the expiration to renew by paying a late fee, but will not be required to take the state exam again. An expired real estate license can still be renewed late, up to 2 years after its expiration. A licensee needs 45 hours of continuing education to renew her licensees. At least 18 hours of the 45 hours must be consumer protection. When a deposit receipt on the sale of a house states that the property is being sold as is, also requires a real estate transfer disclosure statement. Transfer disclosure statement is required of the seller even if sold as is for sale of a residential building up to 4 units. If the TDS is amended, the buyer has 3 days to rescind out of the contract. If the TDS is defective, the buyer has 2 years to sue the seller. The seller should reveal all known defects but not repairs that are up to building code on the TDS. The licensee can never complete the seller's portion of the TDS. When a real estate licensee negotiates the sale of a mobile home in California, written notice of the transfer must be provided to the Department of Housing and Community Development within 10 calendar days. Notice of transfer must be submitted within 10 calendar days of the sale of a mobile home. A tenant's right to use the premises they have leased is called an leasehold estate? A leasehold estate is an ownership of a temporary right to hold land or property. The lessee, or tenant, holds rights to real property by some form of title from a lessor or landlord. Although a tenant does hold rights to real property, a leasehold estate is typically considered personal property.